Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome to another conversation with Caleb Gayle, who is an author, a journalist, a professor, a Black man of excellence. And we're talking to him today about Black Moses, his new book that just released. I want to say it was today. But I've been reading, I've been lucky enough to be able to get a early advance copy of that. I feel special. To be honest with you, I'm not all the way through the book yet, but I am living on every word and every sentence of this incredible work. So, in his groundbreaking New York book, Black Moses, a saga of ambition and the fight for a Black state, award winning journalist Caleb Gayle resurrects a story of America almost buried. At its center is Edward P. McCabe. I believe it's Preston, right? Preston McCabe, a fearless 19th century Black leader who dared to imagine and fight for an all Black state in the heart of Oklahoma Territory. What? Oklahoma? From his rise as a Kansas state auditor to his meetings with President Benjamin Harris, McCabe envisioned a sovereign refuge where Black people could govern themselves on own land and live free from the chokehold of white supremacy. Edward McCabe's dream for Black self governance matters now more than ever. And I guess we should probably just start there. I actually hate reading scripts because sometimes, I or my team will move a little quick. But let's get started. Caleb, how are you? And what does it feel like to be on to wake up and know that you are releasing a book nationally today?
Thank you so much, Nehemiah. I think it feels a lot like the second before you hold your breath, before you go underwater, for those of you who like to swim. And that it's like you're kind of constantly in suspension, but for an elongated amount of time. And now finally you plunge, right? So now it's like, oh, okay, well, I'm in the water, it's cold. But it's exciting, and to be able to launch it tonight here in Tulsa with the partnership of both Fulton Street as well as Magic City Books, and to be in conversation with Tulsa's first Black mayor, Monroe Nichols, who I've known since I was, I don't know, in high school, is just such a pleasure and a treat.
So let's start there, right, with Tulsa's first Black mayor. And the reason why I want to start there is because, just getting into this book, it seemed to be Edward's aspiration to be able to see Blacks in positions of political power
Mm-hmm.
specifically. Um, and so I guess it's somewhat of a full circle moment. Did you think that, well, I guess Edward, I think I guess that he probably could. I don't want to ruin it for everybody, but let's just talk about like why would um, McCabe, why would he be interested in seeing Black representation, and how could he even conceive the thought of that, right? Being a Black man during that time.
Yeah, it seems almost fantastical to think that 130 plus years ago, a Black guy would say, "Okay, I'm going to create my own state." Because even today, it seems as if that's even further out of uh, reach. It doesn't even feel possible. But the way that I think about it is that the United States, for a very long time, had been preoccupied with solving, as they would say, a Negro problem, and also solving, at that time, what they would call an Indian problem. So, in the case of the Negro problem, there were, before McCabe, tons of different efforts, some of which I talk about in the book, right? Some to colonize part of the African continent and dispatch a bunch of Black people to Liberia. There are other tales that I'm not going to spoil too much for the reader, but on Cow Island off the coast of Haiti, where even our vaunted and celebrated, and deservingly so, celebrated President Abraham Lincoln decided, yeah, I'll give y'all 600K in those days dollars to try and make this happen. Because the question was, for a lot of people, after the Civil War, let's say Black people would be emancipated, could they ever get along with white? Would there ever be any comity between the two? So to some extent, Edward McCabe decided, let me innovate on this idea by not having a top-down solution given to me and my people, but rather what if I had a solution not just to quote unquote solve this Negro problem, but then also to present a Negro opportunity for flourishing and abundance beyond just the important, but rather rote liberation that emancipation might have given us. So that's why he thought that, because it was attempted, but just not by the hands of Black people, but rather a measure that was forced upon them because America didn't want to deal with what would happen with a bunch of free Black people.
That is so crazy. So one of the revelations that I came to find is that he had a different frame of thought than the average Black person at that time. And can you tell the audience why that is? And I just remember how excited I was. I was like, oh wow, you mean that he was able to conceive this possibility, yet others could not even, perceive the thought of it.
Definitely, he there and part of it is important to kind of get a little bit into his background, right? He was never enslaved. He was born to free parents, not in the American South, right, where millions of Black people were, the majority of Black people where in many cases Black people outnumbered white people in parts of the American South. No, he was born a free Black child in Troy, New York, right, which was a hub of abolitionist activity, right? It wasn't just like he was born in an average northern town. No, this town had a legacy of that, and he was educated. He was relatively privileged, right? And instead of feeling as if he would have to kind of accept his quote unquote fate in life, he went off and tried to create his own future, right? First to Wall Street to work for Shreve and Kendrick, an investment firm at the time. And then when he realized that, oh, you see me simply as a Black person and are going to remand me not to the dignified quote unquote work of a clerk, but rather remand me to the work of a porter, picking up trash, those are meaningful things, but not what he wanted to do. So he decided to go even further west to Chicago, where he would then work for someone named Potter Palmer. So to some extent, living for him was an education in and of itself. And in that living, he realized, especially working for Potter Palmer, who we normally attribute with that phrase, the customer is always right, right?
Mm.
He was someone who decided, I'm going to learn how to sell. In many cases for McCabe, it wasn't just a product, it would be land, it would be a dream, it would be opportunity that he was learning to sell. And so to some extent, part of the difference in his approach was in part because he was just given a completely different set of experiences, opportunities, and educational opportunities than the average Black person at that time.
Right. When I was reading his story, I was um, intrigued that his parents actually sent him to study in Maine. And I was just thinking to myself, slavery was still the law of the land in the South. And here he is going to college and then going to Wall Street. And this is a Black man. It's insane.
Yeah,
It's just such a beautiful history already.
it's it's wild, right? Like you would, it almost seems like, well, why would his parents send him to of all places, Maine? Well, Portland, Maine was a huge and important critical player in the Underground Railroad. What I found really interesting about thinking about McCabe was that he really allowed me to tell a lot of tales all in one, right? That Black ambition doesn't look like one straight line. It's not linear, right? In fact, it's inclusive of a variety of different experiences and attempts. And some of his counterparts, right, like a William Eagleson, who's really critical to the story of Black Oklahoma, he was formerly enslaved. Or someone like an A.T. Hall Jr., his best friend, was never enslaved. In fact, he was bougier than McCabe, right? He had studied medicine, he knew French, he knew Latin. His dad was the founder of one of the largest congregations in Chicago. I mean, it was a hodgepodge of different types of people. But the goal of allowing their ambition to not just fester but flourish was the thing that really united all these different types of Black people who came from different types of backgrounds. And to some extent, we are multitudinous. We contain severe multitudes that are worthy of exploration and celebration.
That's good. So, speaking of ambition, there's a lot of talk during his time about these ambitions, being able to go and get land and to, be innovative, and there's political aspirations that we already mentioned. And you start the book off with your introduction. That was the first thing that I noticed, was the phrase, and
Mhm.
I'll just say the N word talk, because I want to make sure that this doesn't get cut out. And so, were you just like, what made you want to use that phrase? Now I know why you used it, because it makes sense. The thing is that I didn't realize that that was an actual phrase that was running around, that was
Mhm.
a part of language that Black people were using and that
Mhm.
white folks were using to
Mhm.
try to um, propagandize us from not having these aspirations. So can you talk a little bit about that?
Exactly. I think you hit the nail on the head. Essentially, what Nehemiah is being very polite. I'm not going to say it either, just because I want as many people to see this broadcast as humanly possible. But essentially, people like McCabe, who were talking about building a Black state and building Black towns and building really active and engaged autonomous Black political participation, were in many cases called, or that kind of talk was maligned by white people as N-word talk. But for McCabe, he, in more than one instance, and more than just this phrase, co-opted and inverted what was meant to be a slight and a slur as a means of saying, sure, why not? Let's meet you on your terms. Yeah, of course, it is that kind of talk, but that talk for us, right, is not as some newspaper writers would call it at the time, white newspaper writers, some psychobabble. No, it is in fact part of a tradition that exists far beyond kind of our current moment or that political moment back then, that in fact often our dreams are usually considered poppycock or psychobabble until we put feet on the ground to try and actualize those dreams. So
Mm,
for him, it was part of this effort to create, right? You can't start to create anything unless you first speak it into existence. It's almost like a faith to some extent to say, like, no, I believe, in fact, that this talk that I'm talking is actually containing a significant amount of power and potency, because that same talk was the same talk that brought thousands of Black people from across the country to Oklahoma, a place that, and I try and put this in context for listeners and viewers right now. You couldn't go to Google Maps and figure out both A, how do I get there, and B, what does it look like when I get there? There was
right.
no Google, no Wikipedia to determine, oh, how easy is it? There's no Chat GPT that'll tell me exactly where to place my plot. No, these people were coming on faith. And to some extent, that very thing that they maligned as N-word talk was in fact kind of a pathway, a draw to
Mm.
invite them to build the future that they wanted.
Wow. And so the journey to get to these places seemed very harsh, right? It wasn't you weren't riding on Delta Airlines, right? It was, I would say the name of the airlines, but I'm not going to go there. I'm going to say that it was a rough transition to get to this so-called promised land, right? This Mecca, if you want to call it that. Um, Before we jump to Oklahoma, I want to talk about Henry Highland Garnett.
Yes.
And when I tell you, I did not know who this person was.
Mhm.
And he seemed to be as